The title of the book is Ruins, but it is The Last Imperial War, 1931 to 1945. Why is it incorrect, as many people would, when asked, would say World War II took place between the years 1939 and 1945?
Well, I think there are a great many historians now who accept that the chronology has to be cast wider. And I've cast it wider because the 1930s was a violent decade of new empire building, which began in 1931 with the Japanese occupation of Manchuria, which ushered in, a decade of Japanese expansion into East Asia and to China. Then there was Mussolini setting up his Mediterranean empire and attacking and conquering Ethiopia and East Africa. And then, of course, Germany under Hitler beginning to flex its muscles and finally waging war in 1939. So I argue that there's a lot of background of violence already in the wave of new empire building. And 1945 is not a very satisfactory end either, because there was a great deal of violence after 1945 with the unraveling of the older empires. But I think my publisher really wanted an end date that people could identify with. But the book itself goes on to the 1960s.
So would it be fair to perhaps say that instead of 1931 to 1945, okay, the end date line, that it would be from 1914 to 1945, two world wars, but really one major conflict?
Well, it's quite fashionable, I think, to talk about a 30 years war, starting in 1940 and ending in 1945. I think my book would argue that clearly there is a strong link between the First World War and its outcome and the Second World War, and I don't deny that. But I see it much more as a crisis of empire, or a desire for empire building, which was a byproduct of the conflict of 1914, 1918. Many historians, I think, tend to see the outbreak of the Second World War as a result of Versailles, the shifting balance of power in Europe between 1918 and 1939. So we're back to a rerun of the First World War. And although there's an element of that, I'm much more persuaded that really this imperial framework is what explains the development in the 1920s of powerful national resentments, the emergence of a new wave of empire building in the 1930s, and then the desire of Britain and France, and eventually the Soviet Union and the United States, to reverse that new wave of empire building, which went on until the 1960s when all empires were dismantled.